The Secretary wants me to make clear that everybody's vote is going to count. Everybody's vote did count. I want to make that abundantly clear. If you care about, the values and direction of the nation you want to see, it is your obligation to turn out and vote tomorrow, be you Democrat or Republican. However, right now, given the nature of the president's statements and several other people who have been aligned with him previously, who've literally had rallies saying protest and don't vote, we are specifically asking you and telling you, please turn out and vote tomorrow. One of the things specifically I've had to argue with people whom I've known for 20 years, they say, well, we feel like our election was stolen. We feel like our votes don't count. And I said, okay, I'm not acknowledging that the election was stolen because it wasn't. I'm not acknowledging that there was massive voter fraud because there wasn't. But I said, but if you believe in your heart of hearts that there was, the best thing for you to do is to turn out and vote and make it harder for them to steal. If that's what you genuinely in your heart of hearts believe, turn out and vote.
That was more from top Georgia election official Gabriel Sterling yesterday, pleading with Georgia voters to head to the polls today, explaining that their votes will, in fact, count, despite the disinformation President Trump is spreading. Joining us now, the co-host of NPR's Morning Edition, Steve Inskeep. His latest book, Imperfect Union, How Jesse and John Fremont Mapped the West, Invented Celebrity, and Helped Cause the Civil War, is out today in paperback. And we'll get to that in just a moment. But first, you've been covering the presidential election and the Georgia elections. What are your thoughts going into the Georgia runoffs today?
Well, I actually think of this research that I did about the 19th century when I think about the election period now, for a number of reasons. One of them being that we just heard Joe Biden in Georgia last night saying everything is on the line. We heard President Trump, the departing president, say last night, everything is on the line. That's a common message for politicians to deliver, but it's something that people feel right now, that elections mean everything, that they could mean catastrophe for the country. And that's true no matter which side of the divide you're on. And that's something that was absolutely true in the 1850s as well. It was a moment when the country was divided between the North and the South, and each side saw a changing country. The North was becoming more populous. They had stronger demographics. They saw an opportunity to take what the South saw as total power of the country, which the South ultimately resisted by trying to secede. The North also feared that the South was taking undue power, and that led to an extreme form of politics that went wrong. I'm not saying that's going to happen now. I'm saying that is something that makes politics a little more dangerous.
We always think that the age that we're living in has the dirtiest brand of politics that this constitutional republic has ever confronted. But of course, talk to anybody that's written history about the election of 1800, and they'll tell you that's the worst. You look very closely at 1856, and you talk about how myth-making, because of the telegraph, myth-making was possible. The age of celebrity was possible, but also the smearing of John Fremont and the other candidates were just absolutely horrific.
Oh, yeah, it was remarkable. John Charles Fremont was this super famous explorer in his time, explorer of the American West and participant in the American conquest of California. The Republican Party, in their very first presidential election, chose him as their nominee. It was almost a husband and wife team because his wife, Jessie Benton Fremont, was also super famous. And yeah, he was smeared. There was an anti-immigrant movement at the time, which was also against a particular religious faith. It was against Catholicism then. And people suggested that Fremont was not born in the United States, that he was an immigrant, that he was a Catholic, and Fremont had to decide how to deal with these things. There are other parallels as well, Joe, to this moment. I was amazed in researching the election of 1856 to find out that Republicans in their very first presidential election were fearful of votes being stolen in the state of Pennsylvania. They were convinced that there was vote buying in Pennsylvania. I didn't find any evidence of it then, just as there's virtually no evidence of fraud now. But I think that's one of the reasons that the falsehoods that have been spread in this election resonate for some people, because they're tales that people people have told each other again and again and again through history. People talk about Richard Daley stealing the 1960 election for President Kennedy. And so it feels very familiar when someone comes out and says another election has been stolen. And of course, there has been election fraud at different points in American history, but it's a lot more rare than you would think and a lot harder today than it was then.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.